Imagine a CEO applying to take over a struggling, deeply divided Fortune 500 company.
Right, you expect a pretty polished portfolio, right?
Exactly. You'd want revenue charts,
Yeah.
synergistic triumphs. But imagine his resume is just this raw list of his biggest, most humiliating failures.
Oh, wow.
Like,
So,
like he highlights the times he was physically beaten. He talks about periods where he was just totally burned out. And he caps it all off with this story about escaping the authorities by hiding in a laundry basket.
you would probably think this person is completely out of their mind.
Right, completely unhinged. But today, we are diving into a 2,000-year-old document where that exact counterintuitive strategy forms this absolute masterclass in leadership.
And this document is the second letter to the Corinthians.
Hmm.
Specifically, we're looking at the Catholic public domain version of the Sacred Bible.
Yeah.
It was guided by a man named Paul, who is writing alongside his colleague, Timothy.
And to really grasp what is happening here, I mean, we have to understand the audience, right?
Absolutely. They are writing to the community in Achaia, specifically the city of Corinth. And in the ancient world, Corinth was, well, it was essentially a hybrid between Wall Street and Las Vegas.
Oh, I love that description. Just hyper competitive.
Very much so. It was wealthy, status-obsessed, highly commercial. And Paul's relationship with the community there, what he would call the saints, meaning the everyday members of this new movement, is incredibly strained.
Yeah, it's a lot of drama.
Lots of drama. There's rebellion, rival leaders, and the whole project is basically on the brink of collapse.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because keeping that Las Vegas meets Wall Street vibe in mind, reading through this source material, it doesn't feel like a formal ancient theological treatise at all.
No, not even close.
To use a modern equivalent, this deep dive is like reading a leader's leaked, highly emotional emails to like a rogue branch of their organization.
That is a great way to put it.
It's messy, it's full of tears and stern warnings. But underneath all that tension, there is this desperate, profound love. I mean, he is clearly trying to hold a fractured group of people together.
Well, he is trying to hold them together while he himself is completely falling apart.
Yeah, which is just wild to read.
It really is. That is the true starting point of this text. How do you lead when you are entirely burned out? Because Paul, he bypasses all the expected formal pleasantries of ancient letter writing.
He just skips right to the heavy stuff.
Exactly. In the very opening lines, he drops a bomb. He confesses his own absolute crushing despair to them.
Right. He writes about this tribulation in Asia where he and his companions were weighed down beyond measure, beyond our strength.
Yes, and he explicitly admits that they were so exhausted they despaired of life itself.
Think about how shocking that is for a leader to broadcast to a community that already kind of doubts him.
Right. He's looking at a group of status-obsessed Corinthians and saying, actually, I completely lost faith in my own ability to survive.
But he doesn't just vent, right? He unpacks the psychological mechanics of that despair. He introduces this concept of God as the, quote, Father of mercies and the God of all consolation.
Uh-huh. And he maps out this really fascinating chain reaction.
Yeah, the logic is that you receive consolation in your absolute lowest moments, not just as like a cosmic pat on the back, but specifically to build your capacity to console others who are in the dark.
What's fascinating here is how it frames suffering. It's not a failure, it's a credential.
Right.
You cannot effectively lead people out of a dark room if your own eyes haven't first adjusted to the darkness.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
And Paul takes this concept of finding power in fragility and anchors it with some of the most striking imagery in the text over in chapter 4.
Yeah, the clay jars.
Exactly. He talks about holding this priceless, radiant treasure, the light of the gospel and the splendor of God. But he notes that this treasure is held in earthen vessels.
Which, in modern terms, means cheap, fragile, easily broken clay jars. Now, I have to push back a little here, or as play devil's advocate, because in a modern world obsessed with projecting invulnerability and like having a flawless personal brand, advertising yourself as a cracked clay pot seems like a massive liability.
It definitely goes against our instincts.
But an analogy came to mind when reading this. It's like serving a multi-million-dollar feast on cheap paper plates.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The contrast is the whole point. Serving a gourmet meal on paper plates actually proves that the value is entirely in the meal itself, not the packaging.
That captures the dynamic perfectly.
Yeah.
Because Paul's rivals in Corinth, they are busy pointing to their fine china, so to speak.
Their wealth, their eloquence.
Exactly, their unshakable perfection. But Paul leans into the paper plate metaphor. He writes that while the outer man is corrupted, literally decaying and cracking under the pressure, the inner man is renewed from day to day. The psychological brilliance here is that by embracing the cheap earthen vessel identity, he guarantees that when this extraordinary resilience shines out of him, nobody can possibly confuse the container for the source of the power.
Wow, yeah. And when a leader is that secure in their own fragility, it completely changes how they handle conflict.
It really does.
Which brings us to what has to be the ultimate stress test for any organization, which is interpersonal betrayal.
Oh, absolutely. The ultimate test.
The text reveals that someone in the Corinthian community caused profound sorrow and damage, but Paul doesn't call for, a tribunal or a permanent excommunication.
No, he goes the opposite direction.
Yeah, he urges the community to forgive and console the person. He says the rebuke they've already faced is sufficient, and they need to show charity so the person isn't overwhelmed with excessive sorrow.
And Paul provides a very specific tactical justification for this rapid push for forgiveness. He warns them that they must forgive, quote, so that we would not be circumvented by Satan, adding that they are not ignorant of his intentions.
Which, for a modern listener, the word Satan often conjures up like spooky supernatural imagery with pitchforks and stuff.
Right, but we have to look at the root of the word, which literally translates to the adversary.
The adversary, okay.
Yeah, so Paul is identifying unforgiveness not merely as a moral failing, but as a severe strategic vulnerability.
Oh, wow.
When a community harbors grudges and demands endless punishment, they open a back door for adversarial forces like internal division and ego to just outmaneuver and destroy them from the inside.
It's a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And he explains the mechanics of how this works by contrasting the old way of doing things with the new way.
In chapter 3, right?
Yeah. He refers to the old method as the ministration of death engraved with letters upon stones.
Which is a powerful image.
It is. He uses the historical image of Moses having to wear a veil over his face to shield the Israelites from a fading glory. He pits this rigid, literal stone tablet approach against the new community.
Right, who he says operate with an unveiled face and are transformed from glory to glory.
He summarizes this whole mechanism with this famous, just devastating critique. The letter kills, but the spirit gives life.
And that line is so important. When Paul talks about the letter carved on stone, he is targeting the human tendency to weaponize rules.
Yeah, we see that all the time.
Think about a toxic corporate environment or even, a deeply dysfunctional family. People will use the exact wording of a policy or the literal memory of a past mistake as a heavy stone to crush someone else.
So true.
They're technically following the rules, but the community dies in the process. True organizational unity, Paul argues, requires moving away from the stone tablets and writing the culture on the fleshly tablets of the heart.
It requires the vulnerability of an unveiled face.
Exactly. And wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, in modern terms, relying on the letter of the law is basically malicious compliance.
Oh, malicious compliance is the perfect term for it.
You follow the rules perfectly, but you lose the entire mission. Paul is arguing that division and rigid condemnation are just obsolete technology. The new operating system for this community is liberty, vulnerability, and rapid reconciliation.
Which naturally sets up a massive collision with reality.
Of course it does.
Because it is one thing to talk about open-hearted vulnerability and forgiving your neighbor in theory, but where does a community's true priorities always get tested?
In their wallets, 100%.
In their wallets. Having established this psychological framework of the earthen vessel, the ministry of reconciliation, Paul pivots to the physical world.
He essentially asks, how does this spiritual liberty translate into actual material generosity?
Right. And he doesn't do this by just sending them an invoice.
No, he uses this incredible bit of psychological leverage regarding a collection for impoverished community members.
It's brilliant.
To get the wealthy Corinthians to open their checkbooks, he tells them a story in chapter 8 about the churches in Macedonia.
And we need to ground this for you, the listener, because Macedonia was a region that had been severely ravaged by Roman civil wars and taxation.
They were tapped out.
Completely tapped out. Paul openly notes their profound poverty and their great experience of tribulation.
Yet he claims these destitute Macedonians literally begged him for the privilege of giving to this charity fund. They gave far beyond their own ability.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Paul uses this as a brilliant fundraising psychology.
Yeah, it's like a reverse bidding war.
Exactly. Human nature dictates that wealthy people like to show off their generosity to gain status, right?
Right.
But Paul completely upends that. He points to the poorest, most battered people in his network, emptying their pockets first. He uses it to challenge the comfortable, status-conscious Corinthians.
He even mentions that he is sending his colleague Titus and other brothers ahead to Corinth to collect the funds early.
Yeah, that part is so tactical.
It is. He says he's doing it so that if any Macedonians travel with him, the Corinthians won't be caught unprepared and embarrassed.
It is a masterful deployment of positive peer pressure. He never actually commands them to give.
But he makes sure to explain the underlying mechanism of this economy in Chapter 9. He lays out the principle that whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly.
Yes.
And he insists that giving cannot be done out of sadness or obligation because God loves a cheerful giver. This isn't about like a divine tax collection.
No, and Paul clarifies that the goal is never to impoverish one group just to temporarily relieve another. He's aiming for a systemic equilibrium.
Right.
He reaches back to an ancient scripture about gathering manna in the wilderness, quoting, "He with more did not have too much, and he with less did not have too little."
It's a radical vision for a community.
It is. Wealth redistribution here isn't mandated by the stone tablets of the law, but it flows voluntarily because the community is operating with an unveiled, fleshly heart. When one part of the body hurts, the rest responds.
But anytime you start moving resources around and challenging the ego of wealthy, powerful people...
Rivals are going to step into the ring.
Exactly. And the tone of this deep dive takes a sharp defensive turn right here.
It really does.
Paul finds himself forced to defend his leadership against rivals in Corinth who are actively trying to hijack the community.
He sarcastically labels them great apostles or false apostles.
Right, and deceitful workers.
In chapter 11, Paul warns the Corinthians that these deceitful workers disguise themselves. He notes that it shouldn't be surprising, since even the adversary, Satan, presents himself as if he were an angel of light.
Which is such a profound warning about leadership aesthetics.
Absolutely. Just because a leader looks shiny, perfect, and unblemished doesn't mean they are serving the community. In fact, that flawlessness might be the ultimate red flag.
Right. So Paul decides to take these shiny rivals head on. He tells the listener to bear with his foolishness, essentially saying, if they want to compare resumes and boast, I will play their game.
Yes.
This section is historically known as the fool's speech, and honestly, it is wild.
It is so intense.
In a Greco-Roman culture that worshipped physical dominance, rhetorical polish, and victory, you would expect him to list the cities he's conquered or the debates he's won.
Right.
Instead, he hands in a resume composed entirely of his most severe traumas.
The list is staggering to read.
Yeah.
He boasts that on 5 separate occasions, he received the brutal Roman punishment of 40 lashes minus 1.
Which is just, that's incredibly brutal.
Utterly brutal. And he was beaten with rods 3 times. Stoned once.
Wait, stoned? Like people throwing rocks at him until they thought he was dead?
Yes, literally left for dead. And he survived 3 shipwrecks, too.
3 shipwrecks?
3. He even spent a full night and a day just adrift in the depths of the open sea.
Oh my God.
He chronicles his constant journeys filled with dangers from robbers, dangers from his own people, from foreigners, and cities in the wilderness. He brags about his sleepless nights, his hunger, thirst, cold, and nakedness.
It is the total subversion of authority. His rivals say, follow us, we are invincible. Paul says, follow me, I am utterly broken. But, okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to push back on the climax of this speech because it is baffling to me.
How so?
Well, he builds this enormous crescendo of suffering, right?
Right.
Usually a speaker ends on their most heroic, defiant moment of survival. But Paul's grand finale, he tells a story about being in Damascus, where the governor under King Aretas is trying to arrest him.
Yes, the basket escape.
Right. His ultimate mic drop moment is that he was stuffed into a basket and lowered out of a window along the city wall to run away in the dead of night.
It's quite the visual.
Why end your big defense with a story that makes you look like a terrified fugitive? Why not talk about the miracles he casually mentioned earlier?
To understand the genius of the basket escape, you have to understand the Roman military culture of the time.
Okay.
The highest military honor a Roman soldier could win was the Corona Muralis, the wall crown.
The wall crown.
Right. It was awarded to the brave, heroic soldier who was the first to scale the wall of an enemy city during a siege.
Oh, wow.
Paul takes that cultural obsession with going up the wall in glory and completely flips it. His ultimate boast is scurrying down the wall in a basket, utterly helpless and dependent on his friends holding the rope.
That is amazing.
It is the ultimate anti-victory. He is completely rejecting their metrics for what makes a powerful leader.
He is proving that the cracked glass tube is the only way to see the light.
Exactly.
But it's almost as if he realizes that this bizarre anti-victory resume might just make them think he really is a total failure, because in chapter 12, Paul reveals a trump card.
Yes, a very specific mystical experience.
He reluctantly mentions a man in Christ, which is clearly a veiled way of talking about himself, who 14 years prior was enraptured to the third heaven and into paradise.
Right. Hearing words of mystery not permitted for humans to speak.
It is the ultimate, undeniable spiritual credential.
None of the shiny super apostles in Corinth can claim they took a direct mystical trip to the third heaven.
No, definitely not.
But notice how Paul handles it. He mentions it only to prove he could play their game, and then he immediately undercuts it.
Yeah, he explains that to prevent him from becoming arrogant from these staggering revelations, he was given something else.
He describes it as a prodding in my flesh, an angel of Satan who struck me repeatedly.
The infamous thorn in the flesh.
Exactly.
And he is completely transparent about how much he hated it. He admits he begged the Lord 3 times to take it away.
He wanted the glass tube to be fixed.
Right. But the response he receives from the divine forms the philosophical core of this entire document. My grace is sufficient for you, for virtue is perfected in weakness.
Virtue is perfected in weakness. What makes this section so enduring is the psychological brilliance of a blank space.
What do you mean by a blank space?
Well, Paul never actually defines the prodding in the flesh. Was it a chronic physical illness?
Right, people debate that all the time.
Exactly. Was it failing eyesight from his travels? Was it a recurring psychological struggle like depression? Or just the constant harassment of his rivals?
We don't know.
We don't. By leaving the exact nature of the adversary unnamed, the text invites every listener, across thousands of years, to insert their own chronic struggles into the narrative.
Which raises an uncomfortable question for all of us, right? How often do you, as a listener, beg for a limitation to be removed from your life?
It's human nature to want the easy way out.
Yeah. You look at your own undefined thorn, maybe it's your anxiety, a past trauma, a physical ailment, or a career failure, and you think, if I could just get rid of this, I would finally be effective and strong.
We beg for the weakness to be erased.
Right, completely missing the possibility that this specific limitation is the exact mechanism keeping us grounded. It forces us to rely on others and generates the empathy required to actually lead.
We all desperately want to be the solid gold, unblemished chalice. We resist the reality of being the fragile, cracked earthen vessel.
It's so true.
But the central argument Paul makes to the Corinthians is that the cracks aren't the problem. The cracks are the only places where the light actually gets out.
Wow. It completely upends how we measure success.
It really does.
We have mapped an incredible trajectory today through a highly complex, deeply human source.
We certainly have.
I mean, we started with the life-threatening despair in Asia and discovered how that suffering qualifies a leader to console others. We unpacked the mechanics of the earthen vessels, realizing that dropping our rigid, literal stones is the only way to protect a community from internal destruction.
Yes, the unveiled face.
Then we saw how that vulnerability translated into the radical reverse economics of the generous Macedonians.
Who gave out of their profound poverty.
Exactly. And finally, we witnessed the upside-down authority of a leader who boasts about escaping in a laundry basket and finds profound purpose in an agonizing thorn in the flesh.
This ancient letter demands that we fundamentally rethink our relationship with our own struggles. The next time you feel, as Paul described it, weighed down beyond measure, you must consider the possibility that you are not failing.
Yeah.
You might be standing precisely at the threshold where true strength is finally perfected.
And that brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with, drawn from the very end of this text in chapter 13.
And great conclusion.
Bringing his entire argument to a close, Paul challenges the Corinthians to test themselves as to whether they are in the faith.
Right.
And to prove his point about the paradox of weakness one last time, he points to the ultimate symbol of his faith. He writes, quote, "For although he was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by the power of God."
A powerful statement.
So I want you to mull this over today. If the ultimate universe-altering symbol of power in this text, the crucifixion, was achieved through an act of total, humiliating physical weakness, what does that mean for the things you are currently hiding on your own resume?
That's a challenging
It
question.
really is. Are the failures, the cracked pots, and the basket escapes that you are most ashamed of actually the exact credentials you need for your true purpose? Just like finding a CEO's liked, emotionally raw emails, sometimes the most profound strength is found exactly where you look the most vulnerable.